Thank you. Okay, so my name is Daniela Fouad, and my topic that I chose is the racial inequality issue in healthcare. So the question that I will be asking through my research is, do upper and middle class minorities receive medical care at the same level as their white counterparts? And so what originally sparked my interest in this topic is I was doing research on sickle cell anemia for my AP biology class, and I found that Black individuals are at a much higher risk for mutations in the hemoglobin gene, which is the gene responsible for sickle cell anemia. And researchers believe that this has evolved over time as a way to protect against malaria, which is most common in Africa. As you can see here, over 90% of all malaria deaths occur in sub-Saharan Africa. So I wanted to see if there were any other conditions that were really prevalent in a certain race or ethnicity. So how I developed my question was, to begin, I looked at previous research on similar topics, and I found that none of the research addressed the health differences for people of different races who are in the same social class. They all discussed how people of color tend to live in class areas, which results in the high rates of health problems. However, none of them discussed the probable cause of these high rates between individuals in the same class, just different races. The second thing was I looked into the affordable healthcare struggle, and this is a whole problem and topic within itself in America, but how it relates to my studies is because as I said, the people of color tend to live in lower class areas, which means they also had lower income jobs, which don't come with health insurance benefits. And so this prevents them from wanting to receive the adequate care that they need, since they know that they won't be able to afford it. The third thing is I looked into the public view of minorities, and there are certain minority races that have negative stereotypes, and so I wanted to assess if this is what was preventing them from receiving as high of a quality care and also causing the higher mortality rates, or if the cause for this was just the genetics. So I adapted a mixed methods research methodology, and so I did this because I wanted to use quantitative data that I can analyze statistically in order to identify any patterns or trends or associations within the data set. And then the qualitative data would aid it and go alongside, because by asking thought-provoking questions, I can gain a more personalized answer and a deeper understanding for the underlying reasons behind their answers. And so using a mixed methods research methodology, it allows me to tackle my research from two different ways of data collection, allowing for a more comprehensive and cohesive understanding of my research. And so the overall goal of my presentation is to shed light on the healthcare inequality. And so I wanted to determine if minorities were receiving equal quality medical care, as well as bringing light into either potential issues in the healthcare system or potential issues within how society perceives certain races. And so the science behind the disparity is, first thing is cultural differences. So minorities of upper and middle class may still experience language barriers and cultural differences, which can limit their access to quality healthcare services. And cultural beliefs may also influence their preferred treatment process. And so there could also be a language miscommunication, which can result in a misdiagnosis if the patient's symptoms aren't properly expressed. The second thing is occupational exposure, and so work-related hazards. And this isn't limited to minorities only. However, there are many workplaces with safety issues that have a large minority population. So for example, 78% of agricultural workers, which experience harsh labor and weather conditions and long hours, are Hispanic. And so while this isn't limited to minorities, it is very common in them. And the third thing is underlying factors. So genetic, ethnic, and familial factors play a role because different races have different rates of certain health conditions. And yet again, this isn't limited to just minorities. For example, cystic fibrosis is a condition that is most common in those of European descent. However, I just wanted to see if there were other conditions that were common in minorities. And there could also be genetic diseases that weren't detected early enough, which limits treatment options. But yet again, that's not specific to minorities. And so there are many studies that I used for my literature review, but one of the main ones is, why do Black women experience more pregnancy loss? And this study is about how Black women experience more complications regarding pregnancy than white individuals. So for example, this includes stillbirths, preterm birth, miscarriages, and infant death. And they also have these higher rates of factors associated with these complications. This includes diabetes, tobacco use, obesity, and chronic illness. And according to this study, these higher rates are due to racism and system inequality in healthcare, which is exactly why I chose it, because it's analyzing a statistical health prevalence in a minority race, and in this case, African Americans. But it concludes that the reason for this is because of social factors and not because of genetics. So the second main study that I used in my literature review is race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and health. And this study is about how differences in morbidity and mortality rates between different races are attributed to socioeconomic resources. So people who are poorer and have less education are more likely to suffer from diseases, experience loss of functioning, be cognitively and physically impaired, and to just experience higher mortality rates. And so as we see here on this graph, both African American and Latinos have a large sum of their population living in lower socioeconomic classes, which aligns with this article's data because it provides a general reason for the healthcare differences. But it also leaves me a gap for my research because since this article is saying how the difference is because of their lower socioeconomic class, my research is targeting upper and middle class minorities, so their explanation for the disparity is not feasible. So the conclusion from my literature review is that social factors can be causes of health problems. So these are things such as racism and stereotypes because it gives healthcare providers less of a so-called urge to help. Second thing is that socioeconomic resources have an effect because it affects a person's access to quality healthcare and even plays a role in if they can afford a healthier lifestyle because as we know, like healthier food and options like that are expensive and time consuming, such as exercise. Location can negatively affect a person's health because unsafe neighborhoods increase a person's amount of both psychological and physical distress, as well as people who live in areas where natural disasters such as floods occur frequently. This puts them at a large disadvantage as well. So these gave me a guide for my research to be looking out for these things. That way I can assess whether my results are due to these following factors or if it's the individual's genetics. So now into my actual research process itself. So the first thing I did was I had to figure out what questions to ask. And this was a difficult task for me because I had to make sure that the questions I would ask would properly assist me in answering my question, while also not pushing the boundary of asking questions that were too personal. The second thing I had to do was figure out my scope for my research. And so I decided I was only going to send my form out to individuals in the Tampa Bay area because it would be too difficult to survey a larger area since I, first of all, would not have enough connections outside of the Tampa Bay area in order to receive enough recipients. And it would be harder for me to make a generalization for an area that large. I also had a large age scope because that way I could see if teens were already witnessing and experiencing discrimination, as well as seeing how this continues on into their life as they get older, they have a steadier income, and that's normally around the age when health conditions begin to arise. So I wanted to see how that trend continued. The third thing I had to do was create a survey, which I did through Google Forms. And I included a required informed consent in the beginning of my survey, and that question was required. And I also defined the terms race and ethnicity, since those were terms I frequently used in my survey, so I wanted to make sure that they weren't confused between. The fourth thing I did was I obtained consent and sent it out. So once I sent it out, I sent it to numerous students in my school, and I told them to have their parents fill it out as well if they could. And I also had my parents send it out to a few of their coworkers. And then lastly, I closed my survey and began to analyze my results. So I looked for any trends or patterns within the data between certain races or ethnicities. And I also looked for any outliers in the data or to see if there was a majority answer for every question. And so I received data from every single race I included except for American Indian, but there wasn't enough data for the bottom four races. So the only race that I received enough information from was the white individuals. So I decided to group the last four together as under the minority category. So then I compared the minority results compared to the white individual results. And I found that 76% of white individuals had high comfortability, 94% experienced little to no racism, and this was measured on a scale of 0 to 10. So if they answered a 4 or below, then I considered that as experiencing little to none. And if they answered a 5 or above, then I classified that as experiencing it often. And 65% of white individuals were middle class. 12% of white individuals received government funding, and 53% had medium education. And this was taken from the household education. So if one parent had received a low education as like high school, then the other parent received a master's degree, then that would be considered high. And so the average would be taken and the household would be medium. And 88% had health insurance. And I also asked about family genetic history. So I asked about chronic illness, diabetes, tobacco use, and obesity. And the answers were very split for this, so I wasn't able to notice any patterns. Then for minority individuals, I noticed that I found that 78% had high comfortability, 56% experienced racism often, and this again was measured on a scale of 0 to 10. So 56% of recipients for the minority category answered a 5 or above, and 78% were middle class. 11% received government funding, and 56% had a medium education, which yet again is the household education, and 100% had health insurance. And again, I asked about tobacco use, obesity, chronic illness, and diabetes, and the answers were very split for this as well, so I wasn't able to make a generalization for the minorities in that area either. And so the results of my research were that the statistics between white and minority individuals were very similar in almost all categories. However, there was one category where there was a significant difference. And this addresses my question because it demonstrates that the statistics of white individuals compared to minority individuals, it assessed numerous factors. And so I used this information to determine which one of these factors seems to be the apparent cause, if any, for the significantly worse health of minorities. And so through the data, I found that the only category where there was a significant difference was the racism category. And so this information begs the question, do upper and middle class minorities receive medical care at the same level as their white counterparts? And so the answer to this, as supported by my experiment, is no, they do not receive medical care at the same level. And in addition to the previous statistics I provided, there were 2 minorities that wrote specific scenarios on my survey explaining a time where they had experienced discrimination in the healthcare system. One Black individual said that when they were receiving care at a doctor's office, they felt that their level of care was downgraded. And another Hispanic individual said that there was a time where this Hispanic mother was trying to rush her very ill child to the ER. And in the very long time that she had to wait before being able to see the doctor, people were telling her to go back to her country and get her lame help there. And so these 2 responses regarding race in healthcare for minorities is direct proof that minorities do not receive medical care at the same level as their white counterparts, despite being from the same middle and upper income class. And so the limitations of my survey were first that I had a small survey size, so I did only have 26 responses, so this may not be enough to ensure that the data is truly representative of the whole population. Furthermore, I also narrowed down my scope to the Tampa Bay region, as I previously said, so the information presented here can't be used to make a generalization for a larger population, such as the entire United States. The third thing is it could just be a correlation and not necessarily a causation. So the race in healthcare could just be a factor associated with it, not necessarily a direct cause for it. Similarly, there could be other factors besides the ones I included in my experiment that could be the cause for the healthcare inequity. And lastly, I collected data from a wide range of ages going as low as 16 to as high as 56. And since, yet again, I had a very small sample size, I had to group all of these together just depending on race. So if I had a larger sample size, then I would have been able to categorize the groups based on not only race, but also age as well. But despite the limitations of my research, I found that the results show us that we have a big problem we need to address. And this is that we need to first recognize that discrimination is still occurring, and secondly, determine how to end it in order to save lives. And so that's how my research demonstrates that affordability, good education needed in order to get stable jobs, financial comfortability, and genetic diseases or illnesses are not the problem causing the disparity. There isn't enough of a statistical difference between white individuals and minority individuals in this category in order for this to be the reason. And so since all these are similar, it shows that racism is the problem that does in fact cause upper and middle class minorities to receive medical care at a worse or inferior level to their white counterparts. Thank you. Thank you for listening to my presentation. This is my works cited. Yeah. Thank you.
I was actually just about to say, as long as I can pick group 2. Just for a second. All right. So how did the limitations? It's your speaker.
It's yours.
My mic is muted.
Okay, then you just mute yours and talk. It picks it up.
I just unmuted Mom. Yeah, she'll talk. Sorry.
It's okay. How did the limitations of your method or data influence your new understanding?
The limitations of my method influenced my new understanding because since I used a mixed method research methodology, I was able to use both quantitative and qualitative data. And so instead of just looking at purely statistics of like, oh, 56% of white individuals experience little to no racism, I was able to actually see like personal reasons behind their answers. So if you just look at the statistics, then you don't really understand what people are like actually feeling about this, or if like how people are determining it. It could be kind of a subjective thing. But looking at the qualitative data, I was able to see like their actual reasons for picking these answers, which helped me better understand where they're coming from and why they're saying that.
Alrighty. Ms. Phillips, would you like to ask a question from either of the other groups?
Sure. I wanted to know what was the most important research skill you developed as a result of this process, and how might you apply to future endeavors?
The most important research skill that I developed during this process was the ability to take different sources and different articles and synthesize their information by taking what I need. Because in the past, I would read an article that was supposed to be beneficial to me, but I wasn't really sure what to take out and what to use to help my own research. So I've definitely learned from this process how to, like, knowing what to take and knowing what information is actually useful to helping my own research instead of just information that sounds useful but actually has no meaning to my own research. So I'll definitely be able to apply that for my future research projects.
Alrighty. So, as you were looking at the results of your research, the data that you had collected from your surveys and everything, and you were forming your own understanding, either confirming or changing your initial assumptions. How did you determine which of the results seemed to be the most beneficial or important for you to focus on in your data?
So in my data, the way that I determined which results were the most important was because numerous categories on my, as I said in my presentation, numerous categories, there wasn't much of a difference between them. So for example, like the comfortability levels, they were both in the high 70% for both minority and white individuals. And so like looking at these statistics, like since they're all similar, then I found that like it can't be the apparent cause for the disparity. That's why I chose to focus my results on the racism category, since that was the only category where I had seen a large difference between the minority results and the white response.
Alrighty. So just one last final follow-up question. As you were engaging in this research process, from figuring out your topic through your literature review, through your data collection, through analysis, through everything, how did you have to adapt maybe change your way of thinking or take a new approach based on the results you were getting or the limitations that you were finding?
Well, I did have to update my question a few times because to begin, I first had, I was hoping to get at least 50 responses, but I quickly realized that that was not realistic for me because no matter how much I tried to get more responses, it just didn't work. But so I had to narrow. So at first, I wanted to just assess people from the ages 30 through 60 because, as I said, this is the age where like health conditions start to arise, and most people at this age already have like a steady job and steady income. So it'd be better to detect their economic stability. But I wasn't getting enough responses from this category, so I knew I wasn't going to be able to make any generalizations. So I just extended my scope and to teenagers as well. And then I decided that I would be able to look at if they're already experiencing or witnessing anything. That way, if anything, I'm gaining more information because I'm seeing how it starts off in a person's life and how it can continue on as they grow older and factors in their life change.
All right, awesome. Thank you.